All right, it's 4 o'clock, and hi everyone. This is Dmitry from Magora Systems, and I will be hosting our today's webinar on data protection and workflow automation in connection to the newly introduced, or well, soon to be introduced, in the full power General Data Protection Regulation. Let's wait a little bit more, and maybe 3 minutes for more people to join, and I'll be happy to share my screen with you. And we'll go through the main points. Just getting ready for the presentation. And yeah, just as a small talk and as an introduction, I've been getting a lot of emails lately on updates on the privacy policy from, well, basically all of the services that I'm enlisted in. And it's just fun to see how everyone, like in the last day, today's 24th, tomorrow's 25th, which is the D-Day, the deadline for or the GDPR going into power. And I just realized after a certain search online that, surprisingly enough, there are different understanding of what GDPR entitles and what it's all about. So hopefully today we're going to go through the main point, the main concepts. We'll go through the basics, the definitions, and yeah, hopefully it would be productive and informative, and we'll hit it off from there. And still waiting for a couple of minutes to go. Surprisingly enough, with some of my friends online and social networks, GDPR was kind of taken as this new Y2K thing, that everything's going to go and from head to its feet and vice versa. And yeah, it's really a big topic to grasp. And today we're hopefully would be capable of doing that. Some people are joining, that's great to see. I have about 1 minute to go. Yeah, actually, as a small intro, to whoever's both online, well, not both online, to whoever's online now, you probably wouldn't be able to see anyone else online simply because you don't have permissions to view other attendees. Don't be bothered. Throw in your questions whenever you feel like it. There's a special section in the GoToWebinar software which says, well, questions. Type it in there. By the end of the presentation, I'll be able to answer them, hopefully, to my knowledge. And yeah, it could be a good start, I guess. Right, so it's 3 minutes past, and I believe that we can already switch to speaking on the topic, actually. So let me turn off my video feed, and I'll keep on sharing my screen. Now we'll go into the beginning. All right, let's give it 1 more minute, and we'll hit it up from there. All right, let's hit it. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, the webinar is on private data regulations and workflow automation, and Magora decided to host this webinar, and I'm happy to host this webinar in connection to the changes that are upcoming, and those changes are coming in on the 25th, tomorrow, and those changes are connected to the GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, which we'll be extensively speaking about today. Well, I already switched accidentally to the next slide, and here's myself. Again, if you haven't seen or haven't been in the initial small talk session before the start of the webinar, I myself, my name is Dmitry, and I'm a business consultant at Magora Systems. and we're London-based and well, global software development agency. We build bespoke applications, and we're in pretty good positions. And in the last year, we've been rated as a top 3 mobile app developer in the UK by this independent service called Clutch. I warmly welcome you to check us out there, and well, actually even compare us to other players out there in the market, and you will be surprised and by the level of both the rates and the quality that we provide. So by the end of this presentation, you'll have my direct contact details, including phone and email, and even my LinkedIn. So feel free to drop me a line, give me a call. I'd be happy to be out there for you, because this is exactly what I do. And to a certain extent, my position is I'm like a gatekeeper here at Magora. I'm having the initial calls and trying to understand the business necessities of our clients, and because we kind of we came to this understanding that software is not only about the code, it's about how it performs in business and within the business. So we're making sure that any solution we develop serves as a business asset to our clients. So what are we discussing today? And as clearly I don't know the exact level of knowledge of people who have joined this webinar, we will have to start with definitions, and definitions around general data protection regulation with GDPR. I'll be using this abbreviation extensively throughout this presentation. We'll speak about compliance and what companies have to follow at a very general level, how exactly the companies would have to comply. I will mention the risks of breach and its consequences. I will throw in a couple of examples of industrial giants and some big shots and how they're currently dealing with this as of May 24th, and then we'll guide you through that. And we'll go through somewhat of a last-minute check and try to figure out whether your company is doing everything right. There will be some takeouts from this webinar. And just wanted to mention straight away that consider this session more of a podcast, maybe, that I will be speaking a lot, and there will be a lot of text in the slides. I personally would never had built the presentation in this way, but it's just for the reference, for it to be on the background, and hopefully all the information would be, well, it would cover all the main points. So where does the GDPR come from? At a certain point, European Parliament and as well European Council, they ruled out a set of different regulations and standards that, represented like a basis of standards for companies that handle personal data of EU citizens. And it's all made in order to safeguard and protect the personal data and from potential frauds. And altogether, this set of regulations that currently is written on, if I remember correctly, 209 pages, so it's pretty thick kind of document. It comprised, so that all of those regulations, they resulted in this GDPR. So as I mentioned several times, tomorrow is the deadline, May 25th, and this is when GDPR will displace all of the EU members' current local data protection laws and introduce a more modern spectrum of data protection regulations. So everything starting from control, storage, collection, processing, transfer, any movement of personal data. It will set a series of different obligations on companies and will make them more accountable for personal data protection. And this is exactly what we will be discussing today. And in connection to the GDPR, we would have to agree on what exactly is the personal data. And the definition is rather straightforward. So personal data is any format of an information that can directly or indirectly identify a person. So this person is called the data subject within the GDPR, and if we're speaking of something that can directly identify you, that would be something relatively straightforward. The name, your social ID, and something like an email address or your personal postal address. And indirect identifiers would include something like location data, some different types of identity, And this personally identifiable information would include some things like biometric data, some images, hobbies, religious and political preferences, sexual orientation, and, well, anything that can somehow identify an EU resident. Data controller, in turn, like I would be using this term throughout the presentation as well. You probably, if you're in the topic, you would be stumbling upon this quite often. So a data controller is a person or an institution or some kind of an entity or a body that determines the purposes and means of the processing of personal data, and where this purposes and means are determined by the union or member state law, and the controller or the kind of has the power to kind of affect the data that they hold. And another point for consideration is knowing what the data processor is. So data processor is a person or an entity or any institution that processes the personal data on behalf of the controller. So for instance, if let's take some kind of a development house or development agency as an example. So the agency overall, if they process data on a day-to-day basis, it would be called a data controller. And anyone within this company will be like a developer, designer, tester, whoever has access to this data, they would be called a data processor. And the recipient is a person or an entity which the personal data are disclosed to, whether they represent a third party or not. So it can be like some third-party agencies, accountancies, tax consultancies, and so on and so forth. So really peculiar, well, not peculiar, but a definitely important term is the subject access request. So it's not just one kind of term, it's a process actually, and this is a process where any individual can request a copy of their personal data from the organization that holds it. And this individual would make a written request. Sometimes they would have to pay a fee, depending on as well legislation and organization, and they must be told, they're entitled to be told whether they're, well, what type of personal data is being processed. They would have to be provided with a description of this personal data and the reasons why it's being processed, and whether it would be like given for use by any third-party organization or people. And they would be entitled as well to be given a copy of the information that comprises the data, and well, given details on where the source of the data is and how and who can access it. So basically, why we've been speaking so long and why this webinar is actually taking place. GDPR, the most interesting point about it, it has a global impact. And well, any company, if it's based in EU, if it's not based in EU, any company that actually sells or markets any products or services to the EU residents would be subject to the regulation. So as a result, GDPR would have an impact on data protection requirements globally. So it's a big thing, actually. And those things I would cover as well. I do have a separate slide on fees and penalties on this. This is an interesting topic even to myself because there have been no court hearings or anything legal happening before 25th, there's nothing to be speaking of. But if there's a breach of GDPR rules, companies that are breaching this would be either fined up to 4% of annual growth, of global turnover that they have, or 20 million euros. Whichever is greater in any case. And if you think about it, that's a huge amount of money. And this is not something that, well, can easily be diverted. That's a lot, depending, of course, what your annual turnovers are. But so what we have to understand, the GDPR would be related to any company that processes personal data as their main business activity. So if it's a business critical activity, then it will be falling under this set of rules and regulations. And why that, like, the principles of the GDPR would be revolving around this 8 rights. And it's actually those definitions that you're seeing on your screen right now. This is official set of rights to the GDPR and why it actually had been taken into power. So there are 8 basically. The first one is the right to be informed. I've touched on this previously. So the company would have to provide transparency on how personal data is being used. The right to access. So this right provides access, would provide you with an access to your data and any supplement data that is being used together with your information. You also would have the right to rectification. It allows you to have your personal data corrected if it's incorrect or incomplete. The next one is the right to be forgotten, the commonly found and talked about right, or the right to erasure. It gives you kind of permission to have your data removed if there's no compelling reason to store it. There is as well the right to restriction of processing. It allows you to for you to have control over your data to be stored but not processed in any way. The right of data portability. It allows you to request copies of the data in kind of common format that can be understood and used elsewhere. You have the right to object to processing. It prevents data from being processed or included in databases without consent. And you have the right not to be the subject of automated decision-making and profiling. It allows you to demand human intervention rather than having important decisions made by some set of different algorithms or bots. So in other words, particularly the last rule, the last right, not to be the subject to automated decision making. This is a peculiar point that companies would, when dealing with personal data, they would have to introduce a system where this person who is inquiring about what type of personal data is being stored, they would be greeted with maybe another live person who would be dealing with their information to describe how exactly they're working on this. So we're moving next to the topic of compliance and how can your company actually comply to the GDPR and the new regulations. And whether you're still wondering like if your company needs to comply or not, in most of cases, this would not be a choice. So the time is already, well, if you're listening to this webinar, I got to say that the time already is out. And by tomorrow, there would be some regulations coming in. How would they be enforced? What's going to happen next? We'll see tomorrow. This is, I still can't say for sure how many companies would fall under this or how many would be, well, I don't want to say sued, but taken under some legal action. And as I might have as well previously mentioned, this compliance or working under this new set of rules is not about ticking a few boxes. It's not like pressing accept privacy terms as it used to be. It's about this constant following of data protection principles and making sure that the services that you provide and how you store somebody else's personal data, they're transparent and understandable to your users. And in order to follow all these new rules and as well to avoid significant fines and some damage to your reputation, you should introduce some framework that should be there in place, and will it be automated or semi-automated or manual? This framework should be well visible and accessible through different levels of your company, and well, that should it would show your customers that your business is actually trustworthy and responsible when dealing with sensitive personal information. And compliance will definitely cause some concerns, and well, it will increase expectations to security and legal teams. So, like GDPR takes a wide view on what actually means personal identification. I had mentioned this previously in the beginning of this webinar, and just imagine that maybe you're aware of the fact that companies were accountable for keeping information such as IP address or some cookies that whenever you enter the website. They now would have to do the same for all of the other identifiers. So name, addresses, direct, indirect identifiers, social security numbers, all this stuff. So that's a lot of different information that have to be taken into consideration. And under the GDPR, like the GDPR regulation requires the controller and the processor to set a separate person who's called this data protection officer, DPO for short, to oversee data security and make sure that companies GDPR compliant. So whenever we're speaking of a company that deals or processes large amounts of EU citizens' personal data, they would, well, basically they would have to have a separate entailed person or this data protection officer who would be in charge and making sure that everything is followed and out of all those rules and matters. And apologies. So speaking of risks of breach and consequences is a very interesting topic. Out of this whole webinar, it's still something that I cannot straightforwardly forecast of how exactly would it happen. But like if I maybe don't have a general understanding of how the breach and consequences would follow, there are several reports that say that, surprisingly enough, 40 to 60 respondents of those reports claim that they're not fully prepared for the upcoming changes. So just think about it. We're in a breach of we are 25th of May is coming in tomorrow, and imagine that there are 40 to 60, maybe half of the companies that fall under this regulation. They're not aware. Well, they're not prepared for this. And some of the reports, in particular from this album, they forecast that, or I'm sorry, not the album, this consultancy firm, Oliver Wyman, they predict that there would be about, the EU would collect as much as 6 billion with a B, in fines and penalties in the first year, which is an insane amount of money. And I'm really, well, I wouldn't say looking forward to seeing how everything would go, but this would not be the right choice of words in this case. But I'm really interested in knowing how this will unfold and how will the companies actually be charged for not complying under the GDPR. So coming to the point that I would believe interests a lot of the people who have joined this webinar is the workflow automation. So as we had agreed upon, or we arrived to this conclusion together, hopefully, GDPR is all about the data. And it's all about who can store it, who can process it, who can access it, how can it be deleted, everything about data. So an automation of this process revolves around the approach of how this data would be controlled and managed, like in any automation procedure. So whichever that may be, the factory kind of automation, the data automation, the basics, the basis for this are the same. So going back to the rights, that the 8 rights of the GDPR, and like using them in real world cases, under, for instance, the right for an erasure. If we speak of, well, if an individual contacts your company and they're like, please remove my information from your databases. In this case, you can potentially set up different bots and online tools which will intercept this request, and then they would somehow, this is the question to the automation software actually, somehow they would have to verify the identity of an individual, and that would cause automated request to your database that would trigger like this data purging or erasure from any locations where this individual's data is being stored. So how exactly those bots will be configured and online tools would be working, that's a question of development. And this is, if for instance, there is any chance that whoever is listening to this webinar right now or viewing this in a recording, please know that Magora actually is the company that would be capable of doing that. If there's an automation that we can define, we can understand, we'll help you out and we'll implement it on your website. So another kind of usage or use case of the rights that I mentioned. So one of them is the right to be informed. And the simple approach to comply to the GDPR is to automate this part. So it would require your company to provide a clear and understandable privacy policy on how exactly this personal data will be used. How long will you store it? How will it be processed and deleted, and so on and so forth. So there is some various automation software that can, and I believe that even yourselves, you have stumbled upon something like you register to a new service and you input your email, and then shortly after you receive an email with a privacy policy with this long list that I believe you never read. And this is exactly the automation procedure. So it's not a live person sending you this info. It's an automated process. So, and yeah, let's go a little bit forward. So about this automation part, how exactly will you be working on this? How will you be, what is needed to automate it? Several steps that you will definitely have to take. So first of all, you will have to define the sources of the personal data. Where is it coming from? Who are the data subjects? Then you would have to assess where all of this data is stored and how it's been being accessed, who has access to it. Then you will have to, as I mentioned already, you will have to figure out an understandable and transparent way of how this data can be processed and provided to the back to the data holders, or well, to the data subjects. Apologies. After that, you would have to review your privacy policy and make sure that it complies with the new standards. Actually, speaking of the standards and making sure that you comply, in the end of this presentation, there would be like a list of useful links. And there would be a direct one, both to the text of the whole regulation and as well broken down into like more of a bite-sized pieces where you can search for different parts of it. That's, in my opinion, it's more easier to process and to read. So after that, you would have to definitely plan some risk management and a roadmap for the situations where this data can be breached and accessed by well, some fraudulent individuals or organizations. Only after these points are covered, you can start considering automation. So as I mentioned, or not mentioned, I believe this is not the point that I had mentioned, there is no like a universal solution to automating this procedures within your company. There is no kind of one-stop shop for your needs. Maybe yet, maybe we still haven't developed it. But the thing is that in order to automate this process, it's a case-by-case scenario where we have to deeply analyze every given case and then go from there. So, and Magora would be happy to help. We'll start with the pre-development analysis. Even before anything is developed, you would have a clear understanding of you know, how and what is going to be developed. We usually call it a discovery phase, and we'll on this a bit later down the line. So yeah, going a bit forward. Sorry for that. Industry examples, the ones that I promised you to showcase, and this will not be, of course, I will not be covering all of the big shots, all of the bigger companies, and so we're going to concentrate on several. The first one, enjoyed by many and used by millions, our favorite Amazon. So as you may see, it represents the very classic example on the privacy policies and notices, you can see that over here they have different articles on the topic, and this information, in my opinion, while it basically perfectly covers the privacy policy, I still believe that, in my personal opinion, this is a lot of text. This is like a wall of text. It's hard to go through, and there are some, of course, there are some parts to it where you can report different security issues, and so they as well provide you with this PGP key, which is can be used in order to send some sensitive information to them, and it just shows that they do take all of the security questions seriously, and they do cover it thoroughly. And if you're into going and seeing Amazon's privacy policy page, have a look over here. This box is a link. You will have an access to the presentation after the webinar, and have a look or Google that. It's I believe that some of the first links that you'll stumble upon, they will be about Amazon's privacy policy. A bit of a better example, in my opinion, is how Apple goes around this and deals with this. So they do, of course, they do have a wall of text with the privacy governance. It has to be there from a legal perspective. It should cover all of the smallest aspects, and it's understandable that it is there. But still, Apple shows a bit of a different approach to it, and it's more maybe user-friendly in terms of the interface. So they show you the ways and how you can go through the system and configure your privacy settings and such. So in my opinion, it's more humane, and it's definitely better as well. Here you can see their policy page, and then maybe, as long as you're watching, just Google it straight away and then have a look if you're interested. Another one of more of a older schools, if I may, is the Visa. So they do have a privacy policy page, and it's pretty short and it's concise. And in my opinion, they do have it a bit more open to kind of send your inquiry to our customer service kind of situation, and we'll help you out. So they don't have that much of a text in there, and they know how to do stuff. I believe I still haven't checked out personally. I haven't went to the latest or to the final results of what are the final results, like final outcomes of how you go through all of the privacy policies and you receive a request back and get your data back. What I did do, though, not long ago, I did request an archive of my personal data from Facebook, and I actually did do this simply because if you haven't been under a rock for the past 3 months or so, Facebook has been under a lot of pressure lately due to the scandal with Cambridge Analytica, and actually the data breach that they had. So Facebook was in a eye of a storm, and if you think about it, they're actually the whole situation forced them and kind of pushed them to a new level. In combination with the GDPR changes, those guys, they're working hard to comply and to make sure that actually the users have full control. I really appreciate that. This is the way how you handle conflicts and how you get out of this in a good manner, I'd say. It might have been worse, definitely. So speaking of Twitter is out of the things, like out of this process and how you go and request your data, out of not so many privacy policy pages out there, they are the ones that actually it's mentioned over here that they would need to verify you as a person before you get your data. This is beautiful. This is job well made, because you would have to verify that the person who's requesting information is a real person, and this in turn would allow some changes on how this privacy policy things would work. So we're coming into a closure here on the points of this presentation. And as long as actually, before we jump into the last minute checklist, I'd still warmly welcome you to to ask your questions. I do see that. Wait, I will open it up. I do see that there are some questions coming in, and would be happy to go with an answer and answer them. Sorry. So it will happen in a minute. But speaking of a last-minute checklist, so what's it about? Just to summarize what we've been going through here. Just a reminder, remember that the basics of data protection rules and data processing rules, they have not changed that much. It's still under your kind of, you're fully responsible still for handling all this information. It's just a set of regulations that have changed. So if the company that you're working for or that you run, it processes large amounts of personal data, and it's critical to your business, you would have to go through this assessment of internal assessment of how actually you process data and how you handle it. You would have to review entire work order internally. You would have to go through the information systems, redo the document blanks, all of those long email signatures maybe as well, from this new perspective. And you would have to check how portable the data, this personal data is from within this internal information or management system, like for instance, if you're using a CRM system. But this only can be a very much resource heavy and time consuming activity compared to all of those. And whether or not you're in a position to hire a data protection officer, you would have to find either an external consultant or specialist to assist you in this transition period, or what's better, you would have to enroll your employees who are responsible for processing data on training course. Speaking of training courses, there are several that I as well mentioned in the links in the end of the presentation, so you'll have access to that. And speaking of the things or the takeouts from this presentation, there is one that I have prepared. It's like a checklist for self-assessment on whether you're compliant or not. In order to find this, you would have to go and open up your GoToWebinar control. You see it. Most likely you see it on the right of your screen, that at least for me that works. So, and there's like under webcam questions, polls and such, you might have a different layout actually, but there's one called handouts, and there's this PDF where you can see the GDPR Magora webinar checklist PDF. So have a look, and hopefully this 27 points. 27. 27 points will help you out in order to make sure that your company complies. So, yeah. All right. Further information that I had mentioned. Have a look. Whoops. I'm sorry for that. Several links. It includes the regulation itself. It also includes a more like processable part of the GDPR, where it's broken down into different articles. That's easier to read. It's this one, GDPR-info.eu. There's also this Information Commissioner's Office, ico.org.uk. It represents one of the most thorough guides on GDPR, and some explanations are there. I really suggest you have them a look. It's worth it. And there are a couple of courses. There's one from Troy Hunt and from lynda.com as well. From Lynda, I think I wouldn't be able to orientate you on the price for that. It would cost you something, but you can check out the free online course as well. Maybe you'll be provided with more information than on this webinar, you'll go from there. Just the more information you have, the more prepared for the changes you are. So don't forget about this. So, and a couple of sources, of course, that I've used in order to to compile this set of slides that you've just seen. And as I promised, so there's a slide with this happy photo of myself and my personal details. So if you do see this LinkedIn profile, whether it's in a recording, it's in a PDF form, whatnot, give me a shout out, add me up. Would be happy to have you in my network. If you do have some questions that I would not be, for some reason, I would not be able to answer throughout this webinar, just hit me up with an email. Send one to this to my personal email at Magora, or my personal working email. It's Dima, D-I-M-A, at magora.co.uk. And as well, you can reach me over my direct line, which is 0203-3931-772. Would be happy to have a chat with you as well. So this is pretty much it for the webinar on its own, but I promised that I'd be going through the questions that you guys have sent over to me. Let me just, give me just one sec. I'll get the questions in. So I at this point, I have a couple. And just give me 1 second. We'll come up with all of the answers. I'm just going to go through and check out which one would be most relevant. Well, not relevant, but which one I'll take first. So our company is located in the US. How the GDPR will affect? Well, the thing is that whenever you're dealing with any personal data of the EU citizens, whether your company is located in the US, and if you're dealing with the personal data of the EU citizens, the GDPR will affect you. So there is no way that you can kind of skip that point. You would have to comply, and the best way to do that would be to go through all of the regulation points, and then well, as I mentioned, to assess this process and figure out how exactly can you comply. So the next one, data subject. Can you define this? Well, basically, I think I might have stumbled upon this. Well, I not stumbled. I might have mentioned this previously. Data subject is actually any kind of person. It can be anything that. Well, how to put it? Data subject is anything that can be directly or indirectly identify the person. So it can be, say, a name, as I mentioned, an email address, a bank details, some postal address, posts on social media. So yeah, I hope that at least answers in very brief terms what was meant. So what other questions do we have here? Let me just go through them. Can you specify whether my business needs to appoint data protection officer? Well, there are several cases that I'm at least aware of. I know for a fact that this data protection officer would have to be assigned if we're speaking of public authorities. And another point would be definitely that the one that I mentioned is that those organizations that are engaged in processing of large amounts of personal data, and they have some systems for monitoring this for sure as well. So if your company doesn't fall under like any of those categories, basically, whether they have systems to process the data or they process the data on a large scale, or if it's a public authority company, then you might not need to assign a data protection officer. But just as a word of advice from my side, what I would say that there should be a specialist in your company, or at least a person who is responsible for this process. Definitely think about it and have a look into that. So, all right, what next do we have here? Okay, this one's good. So, well, all of them are good. I'm just trying to figure out which ones I would be capable of answering swiftly. So what would happen if we receive hundreds of subject access requests like simultaneously? Well, it's a good question actually, but it's a tricky one. The thing is that let's put it this way: if you're dealing with personal data, there might be a situation where you would receive the subject access request, or basically the data holder would be in a position of asking for their information back or for it to be erased. If this is a situation, then it's kind of a double-sided question because it's hard to answer because hundreds of subject access requests would mean that in the beginning you already had some kind of a system that was running this. So I would assume that you would have to either upgrade or modify the software that you're currently using, or to update this algorithm that's currently implemented. So this might definitely work. So, and as well, if you don't have that system implemented, you already know my email, you already know my number. Dial me up. I'll try to figure it out. From my side, I'd be happy to provide you with timely service, and hopefully we'll figure it out and find a consensus, and I'll be able to help you and develop bespoke automation software or workflow automation software for you. All right. So, how can you automate another question, subject access request actually, how can you automate the subject access request procedure? There is no direct answer to this. The general answer would be